Hey, you. You're finally awake.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. You guys really seem to be enjoying the Bottom of the Barrel series, so I decided now to go to the PlayStation 1, and as always we could probably do a second, a third, a fourth video with these things. Now we know the PlayStation 1 is an absolute classic for the right reasons, but then as always there are some absolute dumpster fires. So I'm going to go through 7 games that I think are absolutely goddamn terrible. But as always, if the ones I've missed off this list, please let me know in the comments and we can make a second, third, fourth video in the future. As always, to let you know that Retro Wars is a free weekly podcast with over 150 episodes where me and friends talk about the video games we used to play back when we were kids. And you can find that wherever you get your podcasts from, and I look forward to seeing you over there. Right, let's get into it, shall we? 7 terrible PlayStation 1 games. Let's start with the easy one, Bubsy 3D. Now, Bubsy 3D tried to capitalise on 3D platformers booms in the mid-90s, but failed spectacularly. The core issue was its control scheme. Like, while Super Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot would define the genre with smooth, responsive controls, Bubsy 3D employed what can only be described as tank controls, meaning you had to rotate Bubsy in 90 degrees before he could even move forward. This ruined the fluidity of the game, and the 3D platformers were meant to do that sort of thing, making jumping and basic platforming incredibly frustrating. The gameplay also lacked depth, with no real puzzles or engaging mechanics, so it quickly became repetitive and boring. And also the problem had was that the 3D design looked absolutely terrible. Like, it was absolutely primitive and unfinished. The character models, including Bubsy, were angular and stiff, moving with all the grace of a malfunctioning toy. The environments were sparse and bland, relying on flat, untextured polygons and basic colour schemes. There was little attention paid to lighting or atmosphere, or even the most vibrant areas felt dead and lifeless. Like, to be honest, if they'd seen Super Mario 64, I think the developers would have cried seeing the absolute comparison. It was ridiculous. The plot was stupid as well. This thing is trying to stop the race known as Woolies from stealing the world's resources. Look, I've seen this, I've played this, it's been on the podcast, leave me alone. And it should be a light-hearted platformer, but the story's non-existent and it's just a stupid. Bubsy constantly does break the fourth wall with snarky forced one-liners, which makes the whole film feel like a series of random events. And I'll tell you what, it only is saved from being absolutely annihilated because I do love the titles of each level because they're puns on cats. So I've got to give it that much. When Bubsy was released, it was panned by critics and players alike. The game was seen as a poor attempt to capitalise on that 3D craze, and its flaws were apparent right from the start. Reviewers cited its terrible controls, bad camera work, and subpar graphics. And to this day, Bubsy is frequently cited as one of the worst games in the PlayStation library. It remains infamous for being one of the most unpolished and underwhelming platforms ever released. Bubsy 3D is often considered the point at which the character's potential was completely squandered. Now, the game itself has earned a cult following, not for any positive qualities, but just because of how disastrous it was. Almost that the game's so bad, it's almost fun to mock. Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Battle 22. Now, I love Dragon Ball Z. I'm a huge Dragon Ball Z fan. Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball, Dharma, Dragon Ball, everything. Dragon Ball, what's the other? Super, there we go. I had to remember these things, there's so many of them. Now, Dragon Ball Ultimate Battle 22 promised players the chance to control 22 characters from the original Dragon Ball Z universe. That sounds great on paper, doesn't it? Unfortunately, the gameplay was a nightmare. The combat was sluggish and unresponsive, with slow animations and unpolished mechanics. Basic attacks often failed to register, and the combo system was overly simplistic, making battles feel just repetitive and slow. The game's pacing was slow, there's a stark contrast to what we expect from Dragon Ball Z, which is those fast-paced, high-energy battles. And the clunky mechanics completely destroyed any potential from enjoyment from these fights. The game's graphics were also dreadful for the time. Like, Tekken and Virtua Fighter have gone to 3D fighters, whereas Ultimate Battle 22 stuck to a 2D sprite-based design that was poorly executed. That's not to say that 2D sprite-based fighters are bad. Look at Street Fighter, for example. Street Fighter Alpha series is absolutely awesome. But this looks like it could have been on the Super Nintendo, and that's not a disgrace to Super Nintendo. The characters' models were just pixelated and blocky with stiff animations that made the fights look awkward. This is why I'm, don't want to slag on the Super Nintendo. There was little attention to detail, and even basic movements like running or jumping just felt unnatural. The backgrounds were static, uninspired and flat, with dull colours and no dynamic elements. Like, this is a franchise that's known for its bold, vibrant art style, and this game is just absolutely embarrassing. Like, while the game did boast a roster of 22 characters, most of them just felt like palette swaps with no little difference of how they played. There was no unique move for each character, and many of the transformation and signature moves from the anime were just poorly implemented. Goku's Super Saiyan transformation was reduced to a simple colour swap, and the characters didn't even feel like there was any weight behind their actions. And that's where Dragon Ball usually gets it right. Transformations are the coolest thing ever. And yeah, this game just seemed to wreck it. The game was a critical and commercial failure. It was released in the US years after its Japanese debut, and it was clear that the game had aged poorly by the time it made it to Western markets. Critics and players lambasted it for its poor graphics, shallow gameplay, and lack of coherent story mode. The game is often in the discussion as one of the weakest entry in the Dragon Ball Z video game series. Thankfully though, new generations of fans have forgotten this and our next entry, because we've got games like Budokai, Xenoverse, and we've got obviously Fighters. But Ultimate Battle 22 remains a dark mark on the legacy of the franchise gaming history. But sadly, there's another entry which we need to talk about. Dragon Ball GT Final Bout. Yes, it attempted to bring Dragon Ball GT anime to life in a video game form, but it failed to actually capture the spirit of the series. Well, the second half of the series. The first half of the series is god-awful. The controls were awkward and unresponsive, and it made executing complex moves or combos nearly impossible. The pacing of the battles was slow, and the characters just moved like they were in mud. Even worse, the game suffered from a broken camera system that made it hard to keep track of the action, often resulting in frustrating moments where you just get hit out of nowhere. And graphically, Final Bout was just incredibly disappointing. As I said with Ultimate Battle 22, the Dragon Ball series is known for that colourful and energetic designs, but this game just feels downright drab. All the character models were just blocky with stiff animations, and that lacked the fluidity in most 3D fighters at the time. The environments were also shockingly bad. Again, the other 3D fighters like Tekken were doing a far better job. The roster itself, while not as small as other Dragon Ball games, didn't offer enough variety, because there were like 6 or 7 Gokus, and like 1 Vegeta. It was stupid. There was so many Gokus because you threw Kid Goku into it. I think you had Goku, Super Saiyan Goku, Super Saiyan 2 Goku, Kid Goku, and then you had Super Saiyan Kid Goku, and finally Super Saiyan 4 Goku, which was the goddamn reason you wanted to play this game, because of Super Saiyan 4 Goku. But even that was executed poorly, further eroding the excitement around the character roster. All I wanted to do was play as Super Saiyan 4 Goku. Thank you God Budokai 3 for getting me that back. Upon release, Dragon Ball GT Final Bout was poorly received by critics and fans alike. Luckily, the game is largely forgotten about because we've got better games that are available in the Dragon Ball series. And the only thing I will give this game, I mean the only thing, is the intro video for this game, because it's absolutely sick. I want more of that, please, because that looked awesome, but then the rest of the game just seemed like absolute dogshite. Mortal Kombat Special Forces. Now, Mortal Kombat Special Forces attempted to break away from the traditional 2D fighting mechanics of Mortal Kombat series, introducing a third-person action-adventure format. Unfortunately, this was a huge misstep, you think? The controls were incredibly clunky and unresponsive, and the combat was just awkward. And the camera angles were so problematic, often leading to disorienting moments during combat. Even basic movements just felt slow and unrefined, which kind of goes against what Mortal Kombat was, which was that brutal, fast-paced action. The graphics just made everything look browny, and even the signature fatalities and special moves that Mortal Kombat is known for were just reduced to simple, repetitive animations. There was actually a story here. The plot followed Jax Briggs, because he's the main character we should be going along here, as he pursued the villain Kano, but it lacked that complex narrative and character motivations that made the original Mortal Kombat game so engaging. Okay, I say the complex narrative and character motivations, you really have to look at that behind the scenes, because it really doesn't show that in the game. Come on, we all know that. There were no cinematic cutscenes or real character development, just a string of missions that felt like a filler rather than a cohesive story. Even fans of the Mortal Kombat franchise found the story to be a letdown, as it didn't offer any new or interesting insight to the characters of the world. You think Jax would be just kicking ass with his metal arms, but no, the moveset was limited, and the enemies you faced were either too easy or frustratingly difficult, without much balance in between. Additionally, the game lacked any sort of combo system or special attack mechanics that would have made the combat at least a little bit more fun. Mortal Kombat Special Forces were met with universal criticism upon its release. Fans of the Mortal Kombat series were disappointed by the game's lack of signature fast-paced, brutal fighting mechanics that had made the franchise so popular. The poor graphics, clunky controls, and shallow gameplay were frequently cited in reviews. Many just saw it as a cash grab, capitalizing on the Mortal Kombat brand without understanding what made the series great. The game's poor reception led to its quick disappearance from the gaming scene, and is now widely regarded as one of the worst Mortal Kombat games ever made. The Simpsons Wrestling. Now, The Simpsons Wrestling was an attempt to cash in on the popularity of both The Simpsons and the wrestling genre. The controls were awkward, and every animation just felt absolutely horrendous. The wrestlers didn't really seem to have any weight or momentum, and the button mashing mechanics were as basic as they come. It didn't help that the AI was just ridiculous and made the game feel more like a chore than an actual challenge. The visuals were another major issue with the game. While the game was based on the beloved cartoon, the character models were poorly rendered, lacking the detail and charm of the animated series. The environments were flat and uninspired, and the backgrounds just were a bit rubbish. Again, for a show that's known on its bright colours and aesthetic, the visuals in Simpsons Wrestling were a massive disappointment. The character roster in Simpsons Wrestling consisted of various iconic members of the Springfield community, including Homer, Bart and Marge, Krusty the Clown, Apu and Moe, and also Groundskeeper Willie, who in reality should batter everybody. He's Scottish, he'd rip his shirt off and he's just muscled and ripped. While it was fun to see these characters in a wrestling environment, the problem was that they all played quite the same, and there was no significant differences in terms of moves, abilities or fighting styles. Every character just felt like a skin over the same base model and lacked that unique mechanic that made it impossible to develop a preference for any particular character. One of the only things this game had going for it was its voice worked, as it used actual soundbites in Simpsons TV show. However, even this small victory was undermined by the repetitive nature of the lines, which quickly grew tiresome. The soundtrack was terrible, and the constant bickering and trash talk from the characters just grew irritating after only a few matches. A Simpsons game should have been filled with clever jokes and memorable quotes, but the execution here just felt forced and unfunny. Critics and fans blasted the game when it came out with its graphics, its clunky gameplay, and lack of meaningful content. The game was panned at the beginning, as I said, because everyone knew what it was just a lazy cash grab. Wrestling fans disappointed by the lack of depth, while Simpsons fans were let down by the game's failure to capture the humour and spirit of the show. The Simpsons Wrestling failed to make any lasting impact, and is now largely forgotten. Well, as a good game, but we all know it's one of the worst games ever made, so it does kind of live up to that legacy that we can quickly point out and go, yep, that game was terrible. The Crow, City of Angels. Now, this was based on the movie of the same name, and like many movie-based video games, it just failed to live up to those expectations. The game was a clunky beat-em-up with terrible controls, making it difficult to navigate the environment or execute basic attacks. The combat felt slow and unresponsive, with an over-reliance on just repetitive button mashing. This isn't Streets of Rage, remember? The enemies were predictable and lacked any real AI intelligence, making the game a tedious experience. As a beat 'em up, it failed to capture the raw energy of the source material, instead feeling like a lifeless cash grab. For a game based on a dark, atmospheric movie like The Crow, the graphics were just shockingly bad. The character models were stiff and didn't really have that fluid animation, but the environments were the surprising thing, with uninspired, drab, low-resolution textures that failed to really capture the gritty, gothic atmosphere of the movie. There was no real sense of immersion, and the visual design was completely at odds with the dark, cinematic world the game was supposed to emulate. The combat mechanics in The Crow were incredibly basic, with players just relying on simple button mashing to defeat enemies. There's no real strategy involved, just punch and you'll win. Enemies, on the other hand, were uninspired and repetitive, just adding to the overall monotony of the game. The lack of variety in both combat and enemies made the game feel like an endless grind rather than an engaging experience. Upon release, The Crow City of Angels was met with overwhelmingly negative reviews. Critics slammed the game for its poor graphics, clunky controls and lackluster gameplay. Fans of the movie were particularly disappointed as the game failed to capture any of the film's emotional depth or intensity. The repetitive gameplay and uninspired visuals were really the one problem here. Despite the film's cult status, the game has been largely forgotten. Although, saying that, it should be, because the film's really good, and you don't want to put anything down on the film. And finally, Star Wars Masters of Teräs Käsi. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Don't shout at me, let me know if I've got it wrong and tell me how I should be pronouncing it. Now, this was an ambitious attempt to bring the iconic Star Wars universe to the realms of fighting games. However, it was a disaster from start to finish. As always with other fighting games here, they're just slow and awkward. The controls just felt clunky, and the game's mechanics were just overly simplistic and lacked that depth and excitement that fans expected from a Star Wars themed fighter. Graphically, the game was unimpressive, especially considering the time it was released. All the character models looked blocky with limited animation and those stiff movements. The environments, again like so many on this list, they just felt uninspired and lacked the level of detail and polish that we can have from the Star Wars universe. It's the Star Wars universe, that should be a bloody slam dunk. The special effects like lightsabers clashing were poorly executed and felt underwhelming compared to the action-packed Star Wars movies. This game just lacked any real visual flair, making it look like a cheap rush product. The game based a roster of Star Wars characters, most of them just felt out of place in a fighting game. Each character had basic moves, but there are no real differentiations between them. For example, Jedi characters like Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader had similar combat mechanics which undermine the uniqueness of their abilities. Although in reality, can we just say, with these two in a video game, anyone who has a lightsaber, they just go stab. win. I don't care you got Chewie in there, I don't care. But Chewie can use all the guns he wants. The moment that Luke or Darth Vader just go, stab, you win. It's ridiculous. That's why you can't have a proper lightsaber fighting Star Wars thing. Because the moment Luke and Darth Vader start coming in and swinging that lightsaber around, that's the end of the fight. It's ridiculous. Now, upon release, the game has met with scathing reviews, as it should. Critics were quick to call it one of the worst Star Wars games ever made, and even fans of the franchise were disappointed. The absolute terrible graphics, the gameplay, and lack of depth, and the fact that Luke Skywalker should just be going done, just made it a forgettable experience. It is largely remembered for being one of the worst games. Despite the franchise's success in other gaming genres, this ill-fated fighter remains a blemish on the Star Wars gaming legacy. The only good thing you can say about this game is that it holds the title of not just being one of the worst games ever made in the PlayStation, but one of the worst fighting games ever made. So, well done to you, Star Wars. Yay! And that's it. 7 terrible PlayStation 1 games. And as I said, that wasn't all of them. So if there are ones I've missed and need to come up in a part 2, let me know in the comments below. I hope everybody enjoyed this video, and if you do believe I deserved it, please give a like and comment and subscribe, and I'll see you all in a few days for another video. Until then, my name's been Danny. Take care. Bye bye.